Our Indigenous brothers and sisters, their worldview is that the water and the air and the earth and the animals and the fish that swim in the sea, they are all our relations. They are our family. And that is a horizontal way of seeing the world in relationship.
You have me thinking, especially as we work with parents and teachers and considering early childhood education for once. I'm just going to go through the ladder of different age groups, but birth to 6, how often, and I know that I am one of those parents who would have something that happens, we're exhausted in a major spill. And the first question we ask is, what did you do? Or how come you did that? And children having that responsibility. Why were you not paying attention? How many times did I tell you to learn this math concept or whatever that might be? And it puts the children into the mode of, and I'm seeing this clearly at my age, but when we look down at that young person, something just has happened and they're shocked and surprised. And then when we ask those, why did it happen? Or what were you thinking? And even if it's a what question, it's with a tone that makes it a really challenging. And we all talk about Dr. Daniel Siegel's brain in the palm of the hand. And when our emotions are raw, what happens to our brain? And the children at that age are just really vulnerable. Their brains aren't working, but that's when we start to ask more questions. And then when we lose it because they see our faces or when they see the disappointment, and we want them to give an answer in that moment. Having that moment to just now, hopefully after this podcast or more, as we grow and become aware, just looking at that child and saying, you must be feeling, and this happened. So if we just sort of validate what's happened for that child and then ask that student or our own babe, how would you solve this? What can we do to, clean up this mess? Or, I noticed that we practiced yesterday, but we need to practice maybe 2 more times or 3 more times or 3 more days. But it's a process and it's that learning. But when we turn it into, this is a mistake or you should have known better, that child stays in that confusion a little bit longer. I remember that as myself. When someone scolded me, either I wanted to really hurt them back because I felt so hurt. But that mistake could turn into a not valuable learning opportunity, but it can definitely turn into a stuck moment where you're not really growing. You can now be challenged with a connection that's lacking with your caregiver because that's where the trust is formed, right? And for that mistake, so if we look at the mistake, and if we do see it as opportunities to learn, or it was not a mistake, it's just you did this because you're a child, or you don't know this yet, or you're an adult, but that person might be experiencing something. It just shifts my mind in a different way to be able to ask questions. And the perception part, we already have the belief system and perception. So if the belief is the way I look, and I should be great at math, or my profession will be either a doctor or a lawyer, or I'm a certain professional, and I'm not. Imagine the position that would put me based on the way I appear.
Absolutely. So clearly stated, Yogi. And as you're speaking, what it reminds me of is that what I have found is that we adults, whether teachers or parents, or it could be grandparents too, though less likely grandparents, when we are working with children and they do something like you were saying, spill something. Okay. At that moment, what I have learned is what's going on for me right now? How am I responding? Why is it that I'm irritated with this child? Okay. Before I even open my mouth, because as you know so well, I'm sure you've had some podcasts on this, is that connection must always come before correction. it isn't so much you have to correct the child if they've spilled something, but wow, like you said, the curiosity questions. Oh, looks like we're going to learn how to clean the kitchen floor today, kind of thing. But in order to do that kind of response, and then later go through, did you notice what might have caused you to lose the grip on that? Maybe I didn't check to see how heavy that might be for you. Let's measure. Is this one easier for you to hold, or is it this one easier for you to hold? But to, as you said, to be very curious. The only way we can do that, though, is to step back. And I just heard a term as you were talking about Dan Siegel's flipping our lids. And of course, as you know, and hopefully our listeners know too, that this represents our limbic system. And I just heard a great term, Yogi. It's called, when we flip, we have limbic lava.
Limbic lava and all that explosion that comes with it.
Yeah. And then we are no longer the adult. We have become the age of when we were traumatized at spilling. I'm going to use the example, spilling something. We get into that usually when we yell, when we say mistakes are opportunities to learn, but unless we can look at ourselves and honor, hey, you know what? I didn't make a mistake here. I simply didn't know. When I was first married to the guy that didn't celebrate New Year's Eve, I always took a toothpaste and squeezed it in the middle. No one had taught me that you take a toothpaste and you do this. I just kept squeezing it until I couldn't squeeze it anymore. That's the way I did toothpaste.
Instead of pushing the ends.
Yes, instead of pushing the ends. Whereas my husband, was used to being very neat, and you just rolled it up and you never squeezed it in the middle. And it turns out he happened to be abusive. I didn't know that ahead of time, but he just blew up at me because why didn't you know to do this? And you should know to do. And I was like you, I totally, froze. I didn't want to hurt back at that point. I just froze because I became the little girl with my mother yelling at me. Mm-hmm. And now looking at it, I could have said, guess what? You have your way. I have mine. We'll have 2 rolls of toothpaste, but because I was coming from a background of freezing when I was yelled at, I could not respond that way. And so I did it the way he wanted and condemned myself for not getting it right. And I had no concept at that point that had nothing to do with not getting it right. I simply did it a different way. Yeah. And I had never been taught to do this. Now, of course, if Doug had said, hey, you know what? That really bothers me. Would you mind if we did it this way? Fine with that. That would have been training me to do something that would have made him happy.
Yeah, and that requires a conversation. It requires understanding the different perspectives that you were speaking about. In your home, you did things another way than how this person did it, which was squeezing the tubes from the end versus the middle. Small, but it had a lot of impact. And one thing that you did mention is trauma. What is trauma? And does everyone have trauma? Tell me a little bit more so I think our listeners could understand what trauma is versus everything is a trauma that doesn't feel good.
Yes, no, everything isn't a trauma, but a lot of us carry some form of trauma in our bodies. Some of it is experiences, and there is no person on this planet that hasn't experienced some form of trauma. In my training, we have big trauma, which might be trauma that we see that the Hamas attack in Israel, that would have been a big trauma. What's going on in Palestine is a big trauma, a collective big trauma now. But personally, many of us can have big traumas, such as rape, such as incest, okay? But we also have small t or small trauma, where our very identity is threatened, where our own uniqueness, and every human child, every soul on this planet has a uniqueness. But so often, because of our past generational experiences as parents, the way we were raised, we do not allow our children their uniqueness. Now, most of our Indigenous brothers and sisters, they are very good at honoring a child's uniqueness. In many tribes, a child was watched and observed with love from the birth up until around the age of 7 to see what the uniqueness of that child brought forth for the good of the community, in this case, the tribe. And then they were guided into that. So if there is a little girl, let's say, or a boy, it could be a boy too, who loved to tell stories, then they would become the storyteller of the tribe. They would be trained with the storyteller of the tribe to keep the tribe's history going. Let's say there's a child that was very good at wanting to help when someone was wounded, then that child would be guided to be a medicine person. Let's say a child was extremely active. That child would become a hunter. They would be guided to become a hunter. Okay, so our Indigenous brothers and sisters knew that acceptance of that child, that unique child, was so paramount to that child developing and becoming a whole contributing member of the tribal community. Unfortunately, in Western societies, we've lost that. And so many children are born into families where they're told, oh, you're going to be a doctor, you're going to be a pharmacist, you're going to be a teacher, whatever it is, and we stop seeing the child in their uniqueness. So trauma begins when we are not seen. And Yogi, you and I have both talked about our own childhoods where we were not seen for who we were and honored for who we are in our own uniqueness. Mm-hmm. This is not about blame of our parents at all. I'm just talking about this is traumatic on our nervous systems.
When feeling unsafe, when feeling paralyzed, or feeling that you have no way out and stuck like between a rock and a hard place, per se.
Exactly. And then we adapt so that we can at least somewhat feel safe, even though we're adapting in ways that does not honor our uniqueness. For example, you were saying to me that you start to apologize when it isn't, you didn't do anything wrong, right?
Right. Misheard, misspoke, right? And it becomes this big hijack of the brain experience where I'm so sorry I didn't hear you and I answered you. And that is a unique thing. You're so right to bring us back to this point. I almost forgot that we become apologetic because the expectation is that when we speak or when we're teaching or when we're presenting or when we're in a workplace or in a school, all the teachers have to be a certain way. Parents have to be. So then it puts a lot of pressure on us having to get it right. So constantly we're worried, overwhelmed, trying to be perfect, which is, perfection is the enemy of good. And you're not even now going to get a little bit of an inch of a growth. And that's where we get stuck and overwhelmed. Yes. Go ahead.
And something you just said, it just went
ding.
Is that who are we getting it right for? And whose right is it?
Who made that rule up?
Who said that? I went like, wait a minute. We're adapting ourselves to somebody else's right. Now, 2 + 2 = 4. That's very visible, right? That's not subjective reality. That is objective. If I take 2 here and 2 here and I put them together, we know that is 4. Okay. But anything else can be subjective reality. In other words, another person could be looking at you and hearing this and saying, this is how I see it and you didn't get it right, but it's their right. And it's ignoring the opportunity for you to say, well, wait a minute, I see it differently.
Mm-hmm.
And why can't there be a right that you see and a right that I see? And so, if it's subjective reality, now 2 + 2 = 4. If I say 3, then obviously that's a mistake. Correct?
Correct.
Okay. But if it's a way of handling something online with the technology, and you have a certain way to do it, and somebody else has a certain way to do it, both of you can be right. But if somebody condemns you or blames you or says, well, you should have done it this way, then they are coming from obviously here, but it's their right that they are judging you by. Instead of saying, that's an interesting way to do it. I've never done it that way before.
Hey, Deb, you just made your hand. So one was on the bottom and one was on top for our audio listeners. Describe what this just was.
Of course. So in Adlerian theory, Adler said there's 2 ways of having relationships. And everything is a relationship. Nothing that we experience is outside of relationships. Even a relationship with ourselves is a relationship. So there was 2 ways to relate to yourself, to others, and to the cosmos. One is from a vertical relationship. Someone or a group, could be groups too, is on top, and someone, thank you very much. I love the ladder. I even have one that I can do with you. We can do our ladders together. So somebody is either, some group or person is on top and someone is on the bottom, as you just showed us. And then there's rings in between. So if we were looking at, let's say, a king, let's say in Europe, we'll talk about Great Britain. So there was the king and the monarchy, and then there were the noble people, and then there were the merchants, and then and then down here were the peasants or the serfs. But this is a vertical, as you said, a vertical relationship. The other way that Adler said, which is the one he believed we as human beings needed to work towards, and that was a horizontal relationship with others, And that is not only a horizontal relationship with, like you and I, but also with ourselves and also with the cosmos, with the trees, with the fish that swim in the sea, with the water, the air, all animals. Our Indigenous brothers and sisters, their worldview is that the water and the air and the earth and the animals and the fish that swim in the sea, they are all our relations. They are our family. And that is a horizontal way of seeing the world in relationship. All right. So many of us have grown up in cultures that believe this is the way to go.
The ladder standing right up where the king was on top and peasant on the bottom.
Exactly. A lot of people around the world, not our Indigenous brothers and sisters, but many cultures have believed that someone has to be on top and there's got to be this trickle-down effect and somebody's going to be on the bottom. In that relationship, those of us who are here are either not satisfied and will figure out a way to do this. As you know, the dignity double bind, or we will stay here because we want to avoid responsibility. And even though we may complain about those who are up here, we still give our power away and don't accept responsibility for changing things. This is the love of power over, and this is the power of love.
So when the hands are side by side in a horizontal way, this is where we are respectful to self and others and the community.
If you like the content of this video, please don't forget to follow. And also, if you want more information, visit the website yogipateltte.com.